Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'm Delphine Adenau-Owusu. I'm the Executive Director of the EU Chamber of Commerce in Canada. Welcome to this workshop where we are going to talk about importing food products from the EU to Canada. Before we get started, I really invite you to check UCAN website or social media, as we have a lot of CETA resources in which you can find a great number of information on different sectors of activity. And I would like also to introduce our next event, which will take place on May 27. It's EU-Canada Tech Business Day that will focus on 3 subsectors, which are agri-tech, clean tech, and medtech. And later on in the chat box, you will see all the links for UCAN website and our events. I would like to introduce you to the speaker of the day, Christian Sivière. He's from Solimpex. Following an international freight forwarding career of over 30 years, Christian Sivière started an import and export consultancy in 2010, Solimpex, active in 2 areas, consulting to help SMEs to grow internationally and training. Christian lectures at the Champlain Collège Montréal for the Canadian International Freight Forwarders Association in Toronto. He gives a lot of seminars and webinars for various trade organizations and gives also personal training for companies. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll have a Q&A session after Christian's presentation, so feel free to drop your question directly in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen or in the chat box, and we'll take all the questions after Christian Sivière's presentation. Have a great event, and over to you, Christian.
Thank you very much, Delphine, and good morning, everyone who is joining us from North America, and good afternoon to our audience from Europe. I'm very happy to be with you here this morning. It's a great pleasure. Thank you very much to the European Chamber of Commerce in Canada for the invitation to speak to you, and thank you for allowing me to be in your office or in your home or wherever you are. And it's great to be able to share that moment, to be together thanks to technology, even though we can't be together physically. So we're going to talk about food products, bringing food products into Canada. Food, of course, is a great export item for European companies. We have great food in the European Union. Canadians have acquired a palate for good food, and so you have an interesting and interested group of consumers here in Canada, eager to consume European products, these great European products. And that's what we'll talk about today, about the logistics, customs, regulation, what documentation is required, etc., etc. We have 1 hour, which is not a lot of time. I have a lot of information to share with you, so I'll keep a certain pace. I'll try to go quickly through my slides, and I look forward to exchanging with you at the end of the presentation. Delphine kindly introduced me, so I don't need to spend any time on that slide. I indeed, for the last 11 years, I've started my own business, and I'm doing consulting. I'm offering consulting and training services on the technical aspects of importing and exporting. I work with a lot of organizations and a lot of companies, big, medium, and large, to help them navigate through the complexities of international trade. And so, speaking of the complexities and speaking of resources, I wanted to tell you about 2 associations, 2 trade associations that are interesting and important and that have useful information. First, the Canadian International Freight Forwarders Association in Toronto, and then the Canadian Society of Customs Brokers. They're based in Ottawa. Why do I mention them? Because you're going to say that European companies will use European freight forwarders to arrange their shipping to Canada, which is the proper way of doing it, obviously. And then your service providers in Europe will deal with their Canadian counterparts, who will be either CIFA or CSCB members. But why I wanted to share that with you is simply because these 2 organizations have a lot of information on their website, and that's why I wanted to talk to you about them. A lot of information about the importing process in Canada, and so I invite you to check out their website. They also have training programs, education programs, and of course the European Union delegation European Union delegation to Canada in Ottawa is also, of course, always here to help us navigate and grow our business in Canada. And so that's why I wanted to mention them as well. So we're going to talk specifically about food products this morning. And first, I wanted to share with you, just go over a bit of general information on CETA, because we're going to have great success with exporting European fruit products in Canada, in good part thanks to the CETA free trade agreement. And so at the beginning of the presentation, I'm going to give you a little bit of general information that applies to all products, but I think it's good to take a step back and have a quick overview of these important points. So as we all know, the CETA free trade agreement is in effect since 2017, September 21st, 2017. It brings the main advantage. There's other advantages to the CETA free trade agreement that deals with public procurement, that deals with services, et cetera, but the main advantage that we want to that we're going to talk about today is that there's no duties, no customs duties, no tariffs on products, on European products, and there's no duties, customs tariffs on Canadian products in Europe as well. Of course, it works both ways. There's slight limitations with products that are subject to the Canadian supply management system. So because there's limits and there's specific requirements in Canada for the monitoring of dairy products and poultry and egg products, there are certain limits on what we can export to Canada from Europe on these items. But for all other items, there's no limits, there's no limitation, and we have 0% duties on all products coming into Canada. And so to highlight, also to share with you the impact of this supply management system in Canada, this is just for your information. You see, if we ship dairy products, or if we sell dairy or meat products or egg products, it's not that they are not within the quota that has been established. It's not that it's prohibited. Actually, you can sell them, but you pay prohibitive duties. And in some cases, you see for ice cream, the duty rate in Canada, the tariff is almost 300% of the value. So of course, it's prohibitive. And so that's why, so for some items, we have some limitations, but for all other items, all other food products, there's no limits to what we can sell and enjoy on the Canadian market. Now, some of you might ask, are European wines cheaper? Are they more affordable since we have the CETA free trade agreement? And the answer, unfortunately, is no, they are not, because distribution of wines and spirits in Canada is subject to provincial monopolies. So in Ontario, we have the LCBO, Liquor Control Board of Ontario. In Quebec, we have the SAQ, Société des Alcools du Québec, and so on and so forth. So unfortunately, wines and spirits have not come down in price thanks to the CETA agreement, because they're covered by different regulations. But Canadian consumers still enjoy European wines because they know that they're good. And so the main point, or the core of a free trade agreement, as you probably know, is that our products have to meet specific rules of origin, which means that they have to be mainly originating from the European Union or from Canada, and but they can have a certain proportion of foreign content as long as they still meet the rules of origin. And so I wanted to touch on that at the beginning of the presentation, just to make sure that we understand that and how that works. So if we look for information on the CETA rules of origin, then we find them in Chapter 2, part of Protocol 1, and then it's we actually find them in Annex 5. And so that's what they look like. Rules of origin are organized by HS code. So for those of you who are not familiar with the HS code, it's an international numbering system of products that is used by customs authorities around the world. It's a unique numbering system. And the HS code comprises 99 chapters, and then in each chapter you have headings, and in each heading you have subheadings. It's all a bit complex, but it's still a neat system because everywhere around the world we classify products the same way, and therefore rules of origin are organized according to the HS code. They're organized numerically, and so that's what an HS code is a 10-digit number, but for international trade, for free trade agreements, for rules of origin, we only look at the first 6 digits of the HS code. And for most products, what you need to have is, according to the rules of origin, you need to have either a certain proportion of regional content, or you need to have sufficient transformation of a product. So if you have foreign inputs, foreign raw materials, parts, components, inputs, as long as you transform them enough, and that's so that your finished product is different from your inputs. So if your output is different from your input, then you still qualify. And that's called the tariff shift or tariff change, because that's illustrated by the change in HS code. So this is what rules of origin are based on. This is how they work. And that's the first step for a European exporter who wants to export to Canada and enjoy the benefit of the reduced tariffs, is to make sure the product meets the rules of origin. And so for industrial products, they're a little bit complex, and they refer to certain percentages of local content. It's usually around 50%. For food preparations, it's a little different. For food preparations, it usually is just a question of the change of heading, or the change of HS code, the change of tariff code that illustrates and confirms the transformation of a product. So you can have foreign inputs, as long as you transform them and your output is different, you're okay. There are certain limits, but they don't really impact European exporters. So this is an example of them, or in Chapter 19, preparations based with cereals. In Chapter 21, miscellaneous food preparations. They have limits on percentages of originating sugar and of dairy, of rice, but they are actually more aiming at Canadian food exporters and not really European food exporters, because if we take sugar, for example, in Europe, we grow our own, or we make our own sugar. We make it from beets. So any sugar we use in Europe will generally be European. And in Canada, it's different. We don't have a sugar beet production, and we all import all our sugar. And so therefore, that's why there are some limits there. So they don't really, these limits that we see here don't really impact European exporters, as far as I know. But still, we have to verify that before we sell our product and before we issue the documentation that refers to it. We have to make sure that our product, including our food products, meet the specific rules of origin that we find in the CETA Free Trade Agreement, in the appropriate annex, organized by HS code. And this is how you verify that your product complies. And it's a necessary step. And the next step after that is that you produce your origin certification. Now, speaking of rules of origin, I wanted to touch very briefly on another principle of customs compliance under the rules of origin of free trade agreements. There is something called the de minimis rule, which I wanted to share with you for your information. What it means is that you can have a small proportion of foreign content and your product qualifies automatically. And so different free trade agreements have different percentages, but the CETA agreement is the percentage is 10%. So what it means is that as long as you don't have more than 10% of foreign content in your product, you're automatically qualified. Don't worry about the product-specific rules of origin. And so, as I was saying a moment ago, before exporting to Canada, we have to verify that our product meets the rules of origin. And then the second step, when we do ship our goods, when we send our goods from Europe to Canada, then we have to provide a certificate of origin or an origin certification that will be used and that will show to customs when the goods come into Canada and they go through customs, it will show them or confirm to them or certify that the goods meet the rules of origin and can therefore get the preferential tariff treatment, i.e. 0% duties in Canada. And so the technicality of this is as highlighted on the slide. There's a values threshold of 6,000 euros. If you're exporting 6,000 euros worth of products or less, you have no obligation to register on the European side, whereas if you're exporting over 6,000 euros, then you as the European exporter have to register under the REX system, and you get a number that you then show on your origin certification. That system is not specific to CETA. It's broader than that. It refers to free trade agreements in general, and it replaces, you may have heard of the GSP certificates for preferential tariff treatment for goods originating from developing countries. So this system replaces the obligation to provide actual certificates of origin case by case. So this is where it comes from. And so it's pretty simple. The exporter, the European exporter, has to register with customs in his or her country under the REX, for the REX registration. And then once you have that, then you add this, you mention this in your origin certification, which for CETA is pretty simple. This is it on screen. It's just 2 sentences, a date, a signature, and your REX number. And that goes, it doesn't have to go on a specific document or on a separate document on a certificate of origin as such. It just goes, it can be inserted in your commercial invoice. So that applies to all products, including food products, of course. Now, another thing that we have to keep in mind in terms of regulations that applies to food products as well, is that in all free trade agreement, we have what's called the direct shipment rule, which means that goods have to be, in order to qualify, products have to be shipped directly between the two entities, between the two parties of the free trade agreement. So that's it's a detail, but it's important. So we have to keep this in mind when we are going to sell and ship food products from the European Union to Canada. They have to be shipped directly. And to illustrate that, I'll share a personal case. I have no particular interest, or I am not a shareholder. I don't get a commission from this great German company that makes lamps that's called Holtkötter. So it's possible in Canada to find great lamps made by a German company, which means, lamps are not always made in China. They can also be made in Europe. And so I wanted to share my personal experience here. It so happens that I bought a lamp from the Holtkötter company not long ago. Great lamps made in Germany, pretty fancy lamps. I bought them from a very nice shop in Montreal, which I hope is still there, with all that happened to retail in the pandemic. And so what happened here is that you see that German company is not shipping its lamps directly to Canada. It's shipping them to a distribution center in the US. Why? Well, because the Canadian market is small and it's a high-end product. It's a kind of a luxury product. And they don't have enough volume in Canada to ship their lamp directly to Canada. So they ship them in ocean containers to a distribution center in South Carolina. And then from there, they distribute their lamps to stores across North America, including in Canada. And so when these lamps come from this distribution center in the US and they cross the border to get into Canada, they are still German lamps. The country of origin is Germany, but they are not qualified under the CETA free trade agreement because they were not shipped directly. And so they then pay, when they come into Canada, they pay the duty rate, whatever it is, 12% or 14%. And so that's just to illustrate and highlight the importance of that. In order to keep the preferential treatment of the CETA free trade agreement, we have to ship our products directly to Canada. We cannot ship them via another country, like, for example, the US, because then we lose the benefit. There's ways around that. If you keep the goods under customs control, keep them in bond, you could still get the benefit, but it's not extremely practical to do that, and it also costs money. So just keep this in mind. Direct shipment is a must in order to keep the benefit of the free trade agreement. So speaking of shipping, how do we ship goods from Europe to Canada? Well, we have a number of ocean freight services that link the European continent to North America, and particularly on the Canadian market, we have unique services at the Port of Montreal. We have 2 loops that come from Europe into the Port of Montreal. There's the North European loop, which calls at the main ports, Bremerhaven, Hamburg, Antwerp, Rotterdam. They're not all mentioned there, but that's the main ones. And if you're shipping products from Scandinavia or the Baltics, then you feeder them, you send them to these main ports, and then they embark on these transatlantic services that go to the Port of Montreal. So it's like a shuttle service between Europe and Montreal. The transit time from the last European port of call to Montreal is about a week, about 7 days. So it's very reliable, very, very fast, and economical, because these are large ships and there's several sailings every week. And from the southern European, the southern part of Europe, then we have a separate loop, separate ships that go also between once or twice a week between the main ports in Spain, Italy, France, and into Montreal. And then if you're shipping products from Romania or Greece or Croatia, then you send them to these main Italian or Spanish ports, and then they embark on the transatlantic service. And so we have very efficient, reliable, and I would say economical services to ship products by ocean freight to Canada. Montreal is your main gateway. There's also services to the port of Halifax, which is then a bit further from the main markets, but very reliable. If your market is on the West Coast, then we also have services to the Port of Vancouver from Europe. They go through the Panama Canal, and therefore it takes much longer. So sometimes companies serving Western Canada, they still prefer to send their containers to the Port of Montreal, and then they're railed out to Western Canada. That works very well. That's very efficient. And for some other products, some companies prefer to go around and can still live with a longer transit time. So all these options are available, efficient, and also relatively economical means of transportation, even though you might say in general, freight rates have been increasing, and that's true. And that's for various reasons. The thing is that it's ocean rates or shipping rates have increased all over. It's not specific to Europe to Canada. It's all over. So wherever it is that we're shipping to or from, freight rates have gone up over the last year, and I think they'll stabilize now and will probably, hopefully, start to come down a little bit. But so what I want to say here is that this is not a specific issue to Europe, to the transatlantic trade. It's all over the place as a result of the pandemic and specific cases for ocean freight. Now, on air transportation, what's worth noting is that in normal times, you see about half of the cargo that's sent by air on a worldwide basis is usually sent on passenger flights, and half of the cargo shipped worldwide by air is sent by cargo flights. And so because half of these products are usually shipped by passenger flights, and because of the pandemic, we have far fewer flights. We all know that there is far less planes, there's far less services available. We don't travel either by choice or because we can't. And, or let's say we travel less. And so therefore, because of this situation, because there's far less flights available, air freight rates have also tended to go up. So it's for a different reason than ocean, but rates have gone up substantially for air transportation. And again, it's not a specific transatlantic issue, it's across the board. It's just how it is. So we end up having to rely more on cargo flights, on cargo planes, just like this European one here highlights. Of course, there's less of these planes than passenger planes. And so what many airlines have done And Air Canada was at the forefront of that, one of the early adopters. What they have done is they've taken some of their Airbus A330 and also some of their other planes, removed seats, and in order to be able to transport cargo, to transport freight on the passenger deck, as is highlighted here on that slide. So that has helped traders, importers, and exporters, because there is more capacities and more air capacity available thanks to that. And Air Canada, of course, is not the only carrier. Most European airlines are doing the same, but I follow Air Canada a little bit closer, and I know that they have many cargo flights to, Frankfurt, Paris, Copenhagen, Brussels, Milan, Madrid, from Montreal and Toronto, and they're mainly carrying cargo at this time. So that's this is to say that we have options. It's a bit more expensive than it has been, but it's the same for everybody, and we have options to send goods by air. We often send goods by air. We often send perishables by air, or high-value merchandise, so including food products. And so when we're talking about food products, of course, sometimes we'll be dealing with fresh goods or with frozen goods that have to be maintained at a certain temperature, so chilled or frozen, or sometimes heated in winter. And so there, it's important to realize that we have specialized tools available to us. If you're sending perishable products by ocean freight, all carriers have refrigerated containers that have a self-contained machinery that keeps the temperature constant, whether it's frozen or chilled. So there's lots of these containers available. It's reliable. It's a bit more expensive than shipping dry goods, of course, but there's lots of these containers available, and it's used for many products, many food products, of course. And so each of these ocean carriers have their own containers. Now, on air transportation, it's a little different. This is the one on the right-hand side of the screen there. It's quite often not the airlines that operate these containers that are used to carry perishables. They are often rented from specialized companies, but it works out the same. The main thing is that we can keep products at a constant temperature, whether it's frozen or chilled, whether we send these products by ocean or by air. We can do these things. It works very well. It's very reliable. Lots of cargo moves this way around the globe. The temperature is maintained either by the unit with a condenser and refrigerator and machinery, or it's with dry ice in the case of air, and also a ventilator that is maintained with batteries, disposable batteries. So it is quite reliable to ship these types of products, and there's lots of ways to ship them, and that is a great thing. Now, looking more at the Canadian context, what I wanted to share with you here on this slide is the fact that we all know that Canada is a great country. It's great in character, and in quality, but it's also great in area. It's a vast country. It's a huge piece of land. However, what's a little bit special and different in Canada from a distribution point of view is that the Canadian population is very thinly spread along the US border. All Canadians live within an hour or two of the US border, and that's highlighted with the path of the Trans-Canada Highway. This is the Trans-Canada Highway, and I like to use that to show our European friends how the Canadian population is located south of, on the southern tip of Canada along the US border. So what that means from a distribution point of view for your European food products that you're going to be selling in Canada, it means that you really have to select your point of entry carefully, because transportation costs, once your goods arrive at the port or at the airport, transportation costs might be a little bit high depending on where you're going and depending on the distance. And we are thinly populated. So we have different challenges than in Europe, where Europe is very dense. The US is also quite dense. Canada is not densely populated, so you really have to be careful when you select your method of distribution, your point of entry. If you are within, in Eastern Canada, if you are within what we call the Quebec-Windsor corridor, for example, this is where you want to be. This is where you want your entry point to be, because this is the higher density part of Canada, where you have the market, you have the population, and you also have the infrastructure. You also have the warehouses, the roads, the rail, etc., etc. And so within that area, if your food products are distributed from anywhere within the Quebec-Windsor corridor, you'll be able to distribute them efficiently and cost effectively within that area, that part of that within Quebec and Ontario, where most of the population is and where the density is. So you'll be able to deliver your products by truck within 24 hours. To most customers, and maybe 48 hours. Whereas if you're for your customers that are going to be located in Alberta or in British Columbia or in Manitoba or in the maritime provinces, then your products will have to be distributed probably by rail, by intermodal. So it's a slightly different gymnastics, slightly different mechanics in order to keep the distribution costs as reasonable as possible. And so it's something to keep in mind when you enter the Canadian market. Where are your customers going to be? They're likely going to be within the Quebec-Windsor corridor, which then is great. That would be the logical point of entry. If your clients, because of your product, and your clients are more on the western side, on the west coast, well, then you may have to look at it differently. So issues to think about, to consider when we enter the Canadian market, particularly for food products that require special care or maybe temperature control, close monitoring of dates, etc., etc. So now let's talk about the technicality of getting food products in Canada from a regulation point of view, and mainly from customs point of view, and what processes are to be followed. So from a customs point of view in Canada, the customs authority is not called customs, it's called the Canada Border Services Agency. Anything that comes into Canada has to go through Canada Border Services Agency, has to be cleared customs through them. And then for food products, then the important other agency is the CFIA, the Canadian Food Inspection Agencies, because they will also be involved to monitor the imports, incoming food products in Canada. And then we'll talk briefly about, excuse me, we need to talk briefly about global affairs, because you'll see they're also involved in some aspects of bringing food products in Canada, as well as Health Canada. Now, Health Canada is more for medical, pharmaceutical, but they would be involved, for example, with food additives or food supplements. And they're also involved in the labeling rules and regulations. So we'll touch on these government agencies one by one. So the CBSA, customs, these are the main pieces of document or data that are required when you ship products from Europe. You have to do an ACI filing within a certain time frame. Is your freight forwarder who does that, or your shipping company that does that? It's not necessarily you personally, but it has to be done. And then on the documentation point of view, from the documentation point of view in Canada, well, the main points are to get the arrival notice, the manifest from the carrier, and then the importer has to provide the commercial invoice, the packing list. Sanitary certificates will be involved, also required for food products, for most food products. And then, excuse me, the importer or his customs broker will file the import declaration to CBSA in order to get the goods released. And because the CFIA is also involved, your broker will also do a declaration to the CFIA. So we'll touch on that in a moment. And so generally speaking, every importer in Canada uses a customs broker to file all the paperwork or data or documents that are required to CBSA to get the goods released. This is changing a little bit, and I'll show you how in a moment. So if you look for customs information, if you look for tariff information in Canada, and if you're used to dealing with the tariff, for example, in the EU, we don't have a tool similar to the tariff in Canada. Unfortunately, the tariff is very convenient. It has a lot of information. In Canada, if you look for tariff information, you'll look in the CBSA customs tariff. And if you're looking for specific regulations, then you'll have to look elsewhere. Unfortunately, we don't have a unified portal like the tariff where we find not only the tariff information, but also the regulations that apply to products. So it's a little bit more tricky to find that, but this is where you would begin to check that. And so you'll see, for example, I just took a screenshot of the CBSA customs tariff. You'll see that the standard duty rate or the standard tariff on mustard, prepared mustard, is 9.5%. And you'll see these letters on the right-hand side with these funny abbreviations. They identify free trade agreement countries or countries that have preferential tariff treatment. So you see in these abbreviations, if you see CEUT, that refers to the Canada European Union tariff. So that refers to CETA. And there for CETA, under CETA, providing our mustard meets the rules of origin, then it comes in free of duties, free of taxes. So it's duty free, it's tariff free, it's at 0%. So this is where you'd find the information, the CBSA tariff. The import declaration, there's not much to say about that. I just wanted to show it to you just for the fun. This is the Canadian equivalent to the single administrative document that we use in the EU. It's called the B3. The main elements, the important information really is the HS code. The tariff code has to be declared properly for compliance reason and also to apply the proper tariff. The value is one of the main components, and the origin. So the origin that refers to where the product comes from, but also is the product, does the product comply with the rules of origin? Now, something that's different from Europe as far as the value declaration, when we declare goods to customs, when we bring goods into Canada, is that we use the value of the product, the selling price or the sales price, or what's called the transactional value, but we deduct the freight and the insurance cost. So it's different from Europe. In Europe, it's the other way. In Europe, we use what's called the landed price, the cost of the merchandise and the shipping cost to the landing point in Europe. In Canada, it's different. So it means that we don't pay taxes or we don't pay duties on freight and insurance. We only pay it on the value of the goods. So what impact does that have for you? For example, on your customs on your commercial invoice, it'd be neat if you as the European exporter if you pay the freight costs and the insurance costs, it would be neat to show them separately on your commercial invoice. It would make the work of the customs broker easier. Now, as far as taxes is concerned, we have what's called the GST, the Goods and Services Tax in Canada, which is a federal tax that works more or less like the VAT. The percentage is 5%. Some of you Europeans might be jealous of that, right? Because in some European countries, the VAT is like 20% or 25%. So here it's 5%. So we're pretty reasonable in Canada. And so that is paid by the importer, wherever the goods come from. There's no provincial tax on imports. There's only a federal tax. And the last point I wanted to mention on the slide here, as far as customs is concerned, is that, yes, it's possible for a European company to sell DDP to a Canadian customer and then become the importer of record in Canada. It's called a non-resident importer. It works quite well. It's a bit tricky for GST, and it's also a little bit tricky for food products. We'll see why in a moment. And then another point, just to let you know about the value thresholds that are applicable in Canada. So we have a very low duty and tax exemption, is $20. In the EU is 22 euros. So very, very, very different, very similar. It's 22 euros for VAT, and it's 150 euros for duties. But in Canada, it's $20. So it's important to know, for those of you who are in e-commerce, for example, when a Canadian consumer brings anything from overseas that exceeds $20, then he or she starts paying duties if applicable, or at least taxes, GST. This limit has been raised to 40 and 150, but it's only in the context of the new North American Free Trade Agreement. There's two thresholds also for customs purposes. There's one threshold of $3,300. It really doesn't make a big difference, but just for information, if you have under $3,300, it goes through customs faster because it's considered a low value shipment. And if it's over $3,300, it follows a regular process, but not a big deal really, not a huge difference. Now, I don't want to get into the mechanics of doing the customs work because that would be far too boring, but I just want to let you know about a new system that has been phased in Canada called the CARM, the CBSA Assessment and Revenue Management System. And so what that means is that it's going to change the way we do the work. You know, it's going to change the way we file our information with customs, with CBSA. And so for those of you who are new, then it's a good time to become familiar with it. And for those of you who are already doing business in Canada, if you haven't heard of CARM, then it could be alarming because it's something that's coming very soon, and you have to be aware of that because it changes the way we're going to work with customs. In particular, the most important part is that importers will have to have an account with customs, with CBSA, and will have to have a deposit, a security guarantee, which was not the case before. Up to now, it's the customs broker who did all that, and the importer just had to feed the information and to the customs broker, and the customs broker did everything. From now on, with CARM being in place, then there'll be more, the importer will have more responsibilities and will have to deal with certain things with customs directly. So it's going to make things easier. It's advertised or publicized as by CBSA as a simplified importing process. Of course, we have to see in practice if it's going to make things simpler or more complicated, and we cannot judge that in advance. It's being phased in over between this summer and next year. So again, it's technical, so there's no need to spend time on that, but it's good for you to know, to recognize that the term CARM, it is changing the way Canadian importers deal with customs. And so now we'll talk about the main agency that we're going to be dealing with when we're dealing with food products. It's the CFIA, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. They introduced a new regulation called the Safe Food for Canadians Act, which is a great name. We wouldn't want it to be any other way. And so there, what that has changed, and that has been phased in over the last 4 or 5 years, and it's in full effect now since last year, and it gives new obligations for food importers to have a license. And so up to now, and before this change, only meat and seafood importers have to have a specific license, and now all food importers in Canada must have a license, must apply to the CFA for a license. So it makes things a little bit more complex, and so there's a process to apply for that, and you have to, it's not just applying and not just paying the fee, you also have to have a plan in place for product management and for security and safety and for potential product recalls. So it's quite fancy, quite elaborate, but we have to follow that, and that is what has been put in place over the last few years for food imports in Canada. There's an obligation for all importers to have a license issued by the CFIA. So other points that are worth noting when we're bringing foods into Canada is that, we have, or you may not know, but now you know that we have bilingual packaging requirements in Canada. Whenever we sell our goods for retail, the product has to be described in both official languages, i.e. in English and in French. So something to quite important to know about, obviously, and which is relatively easy. Now, what is more tricky and a bit technical is the questions about ingredients, list of ingredients on packages, and nutritional information. So why is that tricky? Is because it has changed. It has changed over the last few years, and we are still in a transition mode We kind of follow also what's happening in the US to a certain extent, which is logical because we do a lot of business with the US. And here, so what has happened is that there's been changes on that. So these regulations are administered by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, the CFIA, but they are jointly produced with Health Canada. And so we are still in the transition period. And so I'll show you examples of what has changed and to give you an idea. So for the nutritional information, you see these are like slight changes in order to show the information more clearly for consumers. So it's all very detailed and very important things to know about. So we have to be familiar with these. It's mainly the appearance of the information in some cases, but in some other cases it's more important than that. In some cases, for example, potassium was not required before and it is now, and also how the doses are shown. And so it's a bit technical, but I wanted to show that to you for your information so that you get an idea of what it looks like or what it involves. And we're still in the process of transitioning to these new regulations. So we have until December 14 to adapt to these new rules. So sugars, there's also important changes on sugars. They have to be shown a little bit differently. They have to, if you see at the bottom, if you have several sugar ingredients, they have to be grouped together as sugars. There's also changes in the types, in the way we show some of this information. Food colorings can't be shown as numbers anymore. You have to show the name. Ingredients and contains have to be shown in bold type, etc., etc. Nutritional fact for single packages or for packages that we have highlighted here, a carton of milk. You can no longer show the nutritional fact for a portion of that package of 473 ml. You have to show the nutritional fact for the total of that package. And so things like this are quite detailed, depending on the type of product you're selling. There's also been a change for these types of products that you can't weigh or you can't quantify only by numbers. So for example, if you have crackers, you used to be able to choose the number of crackers you could highlight in your nutritional fact. And now there's a new rule that's around the fact that we have to get as close as possible to 20 grams. And so that's why in this package on the left side, we show the nutritional information on 6 crackers because it takes us to 21 grams, whereas on the one on the right side, we can show 11 crackers, it takes us to 19 grams. So the rule here is get as close as possible to 20 grams. So you see a little bit of detailed information. Those of you who are interested, you can feel free to reach out to me. We're not sharing the presentation, but I'll be happy to send you this technical information if you're interested. And so the last, to close our presentation today, I wanted to talk to you briefly about the global affairs. I said at the beginning that global affairs were involved in the importing process of foodstuffs. Why is that? Is because they are the ones who administer the quota for products that are under supply management system in Canada, which is mainly dairy, poultry, and eggs. And so when a Canadian importer wants to import dairy products, particularly cheese, then he or she has to apply for a quota from the Canadian government, and that is administered by Global Affairs Canada. The interesting thing about that is that the list of companies that have gotten quotas is public, so you can look for it and you can get it and see who has gotten the quota for 2021. And so in January 2022, you will be able to see who has gotten a cheese import quota for 2022. The process is relatively complex, but still relatively straightforward. You have, in addition to the application, you have to supply an affidavit to confirm who you are and that you meet the requirements. And also there has to be an independent verification by a lawyer or an accountant that says that what you have said is correct. And away you go and you send your application. And just for information, I wanted to share this slide with you to highlight the way, or illustrate the way the new cheese quota that were made available under CETA, how they were awarded. They were awarded by the Canadian government or handed out half 50% from cheese producers and 50% to retailers and distributors. And then within these groups, they were given mainly to small producers or distributors. So that's just for information, because I know it was something a little bit controversial. And so before ending my presentation, so we have a little bit of time for exchanges and questions, I wanted to talk briefly about the US. Why do I want to talk about the US? Because they are our neighbors and newfound friends since January. And because it's our biggest export market. 3/4 of our exports go to the US every year. And so I wanted to end with this to make you aware, you great European food exporters and producers, keep in mind that when you're in Canada, it's relatively easy and it's very efficient and convenient to serve the US market from Canada. And so, as you know, your products get into Canada duty-free. Now, to re-export them from Canada to the US, you either have to pay the applicable duties in the US, because we don't have a free trade agreement between the European Union and the US, but you could also, if you organize yourself to transform them enough in Canada, then to meet the rules of origin of the United States, Mexico, Canada free trade agreement, then your products could enter the US duty-free from Canada. And keep in mind that the US has a high duty and tax exemption of $800, which means that if you send goods from anywhere in the world to the US, as long as you don't exceed the $800 limit, your product gets into the US free of duties and taxes. So it's a great way to serve, particularly, for example, if you're in e-commerce, to serve the US market from Canada. Of course, you have to be familiar then with the US regulations, which are handled and monitored and administered by the Food and Drug Administration for most food products, or by the US Department of Agriculture for certain products. And so, of course, that is a demanding process. But so I just wanted to share this with you at the end to let you know about this possibility. Think of Canada as a stepping stone into the US market, including for food products. And with this, that brings me to the end of the presentation. I hope I didn't go too fast. I wanted to keep a good pace so that we have time at the end for exchanges and questions. I certainly hope that this was interesting and informative. I wish you the best of luck in developing the Canadian market for your great European food products, and I'll be happy to exchange with you. And I'll hand over the microphone back to Delphine for that. So thank you again for your attention, and I look forward to exchanging with you.
Thank you very much, Christian, for your presentation. It was really interesting. Even I learned a lot of things, so thank you very much. Before we actually go to the question, I just wanted to give you information, and mostly on the US point you mentioned. We organized a webinar, I think now it's a month ago, on how to, for EU companies, how to access the US market from Canada. So both leveraging CETA and CUSMA. So everything is on our YouTube channel. We also have a guide on our website. I've sent the link to our website, so feel free to also check this webinar for this. We do have a number of questions, so I will try to, and we do have a number of comments that I will share with Christian, and also for your information, there will, so this recording will be on our YouTube channel, and we'll also have a guide later on that will be sent. So we'll take the comments with Christian into consideration. But to go to the question, the first one is, can you speak about the need for signatures on the certificate of origin certification?
Yes, well, as far as I know, it needs to be signed, yes, which I think could be an electronic signature.
Okay. Okay, we have another one. Are there any specifics that we should be aware of when it comes to import into Canada of extra virgin olive oil? Is there any specificity people need to know about?
There could be. I'm not a specialist of that, aside from the fact that I know it's very good for you, extra virgin olive oil. Now, there could be, yes, there could be specific requirements. I'm sorry, I'm not aware of that.
Okay.
Except that I know it's a great product.
Okay, great. Maybe you can send us an email at info@ucan.com, and we can try to see if there's any specificity around this.
Absolutely.
Another one we have is, how do we find out which country that Canada views as having equivalent safe food safety administration?
Okay, that's a good question. That we have to look up on, unfortunately, we have to look up on the CFIA website. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency has that information. Sometimes it's a bit of a, it's hard to find because as we all know, on the internet, everything is on the internet, and everything is on website, but sometimes it's hard to find, but it is there. The CFIA maintains that. I am not sure that there is any other place where we can find that. I think it's really the CFIA, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, would have that.
Okay. We have another question regarding REX. Isn't it better for an European exporter to be registered under REX even if all the shipments are not above the 6,000 euros? In this case, if they send a shipment under 6,000, can they also include their REX number?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think it's a good idea. It's a good principle to be REX registered, absolutely, and then nothing wrong with showing your REX registration number on your origin certification, even if you're below the 6,000 euros threshold. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good habit, definitely. I would agree with that.
Touching base on the US market, do we need to get food products registered with FDA before shipping to the US?
Yes, we do, and the regulations in the US have changed over the last few years. They brought forward something called the Food Modernization Act a few years back. We are in the last stages of that. The last stage was something called the Foreign Supplier Verification Program, FSVP. And so under that FSVP program, all food establishments that sell in the US have to be registered with the FDA, and they also have to maintain their registration. I don't remember if it's yearly or if it's every 2 years, but yes, there's definitely a process. Every food establishment that sells in the US must be registered with the FDA.
Great. I think for the question we are over, so I'll just mention the 2 comments that we received. Is that the CAM portal goes live on May 25th. And so basically the person is telling the European companies to register as fast as possible.
Yes, that's a good point. Absolutely, yes.
Okay, great. And then also there was a comment regarding, so you mentioned that Canada does not have something like Tariff, but the automated import reference system in Canada is similar, and that you can find out about requirements, including related to CFIA based on HS code and extension. Is far from being perfect, but it is used as a starting point for food importers.
Yes, and I would agree with that. I made a broad statement about the fact that, yes, CBSA does not have something equivalent to the Tariff, and because the Tariff is really a great tool. But yes, thank you for bringing this up, Balint. It is true that we have tools in Canada. It's just sometimes they're not well known, or they're harder to find, or we have to look in different spots to find that information. But it's a good point. Yeah, the AIRS Automated Import Reference System is a tool available to food importers. Thank you for bringing that up.
Great. All right, so I guess we are 2 minutes away from the hour. So I would like to thank you, Christian Sivière, for this great presentation. That was really helpful for hopefully, first me and hopefully everyone.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Great. Thank you also for the participant for joining us today. Again, we have a lot of CETA resources on our website, so you can go to ucan.com and you have a CETA section where you can choose there's a lot of information like guides, webinars that we organized. So feel free to go there. We will send the link of the event later today or tomorrow. And later on in a few weeks, you will also have the guide that will help you to keep as a PDF on your desktop in case you have a question anytime. And really feel free to contact us. Our next event will be on May 27. EU-Canada Tech Business Day. Registration links are also on our website. It will be focusing on clean tech, agri-tech, and medtech. And again, thank you very much, everyone. And I wish you a great day if you're in Canada, or a great evening if you are in Europe. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.
Thanks.